Every year, usually during our graduation ceremonies, UBC has the honor of bestowing honorary degrees upon individuals who, in the opinion of the university community, have fit the criteria of excellence and eminence in their chosen field. Paul Thiele exemplifies these characteristics, and it is our pleasure to grant him an honorary degree. Ever since his arrival at UBC as an arts undergraduate student in 1962, Paul Thiele has been an influential advocate for the blind and visually impaired. With only enough vision to read print, he pursued his studies and led an active student life, particularly in support of other visually impaired and blind students. After graduating, he pursued a master's degree in comparative literature, but put his studies on hold when he was appointed as head of the Charles Crane Memorial Library and curator of its collection. Under his guidance, the library grew and evolved to become the valued resource that it is today. He also participated in a continuous range of advocacy initiatives outside of UBC, which included his appointment by the Provincial Ministry of Education to an interprovincial board to coordinate and manage resources for blind and visually impaired students in the public school systems of the Western provinces. In addition, he founded and chaired the Committee on Library Services for the Visually Impaired, a subcommittee of the Canadian Library Association. He also became the Canadian representative of the International Library Services for the Blind, an organization that influenced the provision of library services to visually impaired and blind communities in other parts of the world. After retirement, he continued to serve numerous organizations, including local housing societies that provide guidance and services to disabled communities, and as a government-appointed member of the board of the Canadian National Institute for the Blind. In recognition of his leadership towards making UBC a supportive learning environment for vision-impaired students, and for his indelible contributions to the profession of library management, and in invoking legislative changes throughout Canada, we are pleased to confer the degree Doctor of Laws, honoris causa, upon Paul Ernest Thiele. It now gives me great pleasure to ask Dr. Thiele to say a few words.
What or who is Paul E. Thiele? I was born on March 10th, 1942 in Lodz, Poland, and I was diagnosed in my 4th month of having, basically they called it congenital cataracts covering both eyes. If left untreated, that would have caused blindness in an early age, virtual total blindness. So my father found the only expert on operating on young children, and the first procedure was when I was just 4 months old. It was followed up by 7 more procedures later on, right up till 1949. That set of procedures gave me 10% of normal vision, which I always assumed was a lot. And I considered myself basically fully sighted until one day I was waiting at the bus stop, and a young mom with an even younger child was looking to see what bus was coming. And the young child said, "Mom, that's a number 5 bus. That's a Robson bus." And I thought to myself, how the heck can someone so young see that far? And suddenly the thought came to me that, I couldn't even see the bus at that point, never mind read the sign. But anyways, that's by the way of a background. I enrolled in school, in a normal school, not a special school for the blind, because that would have meant that I had to move away from home to a little town near Frankfurt called Marburg, where the Blind Studies Institute, a great organization associated with Phillips University, is located. My parents were determined that I should get my education in a normal high school environment. I did well. I was fortunate to live in an area where English was, or another language was started already in grade 4. So I had a lot of English, I hoped. So when I came to Canada and came to Vancouver, our home was very close to Cecil Rhodes School. And one day, my teacher, Mrs. Smith, said, Paul, why were you away yesterday? Were you playing hooky? And I said, oh, no, Mrs. Smith, I don't even own a hooky stick. And that caused, of course, a lot of riot in the class. And I made other mistakes. And I know that our high school radio station has some tapes of me. And I, at that point, had quite a strong German accent, which I hope I have lost by now. So going to school and then enrolling in university, I was, as I said before, I was determined to be a disc jockey, and was persuaded by Al Jordan, the program director, to, as he put it, become a teacher or become something with a university degree. That's Paul Thiele. Now, who is Charles Allen Crane? Charlie Crane was a broom maker in a CNIB-run workshop, but he really was an awesome scholar, somebody who was very much determined to find out in healthcare and health sciences about his particular predicament. He suffered from something called Usher syndrome, a recessive gene which caused him to lose both his vision and his eyesight by the time he was 12 years old. And, he ended up in a silent and dark world, and the only connection to the outside world were Braille books in Braille. He made this passion into a lifetime opportunity, and he bought, wherever he could, academic type textbooks in areas like forestry, economics, you name it, to start a collection. By the time he passed away, his collection of Braille books numbered about close to several thousand titles. Now, you have to remember that Braille is a very tough medium to work with, because the ratio of Braille to print is very, very high. So it takes many volumes to cover a small text. I have at our official opening at UBC, we had an official session of photographs of press releases, and they took a photo of me with a huge pile of Braille books laid end to end that obviously was threatening to topple me. And the title of the volume we picked was The English Pocket Dictionary. And we wanted to know whose pockets they were thinking of with the Braille. But it gives you an idea of what we needed to deal with to house this very large collection of textbooks on politics, on forestry, on chemistry, on virtually any subject. And Charles Crane was an avid reader. Now, we are very grateful to the family, to Charles Crane's family, for making this offer. And of course, it was to determine the outcome was to determine my 50-year career at UBC. I'd like to, of course, thank the university for having faith in me that I can get this done. I really didn't have any previous training in organizing a whole library collection, but Judy did a wonderful job of cataloging the subject areas, assigning call numbers with the help of our main library's cataloging department, of hand typing on something that looked like cellophane, the Braille title and the print title. Then she got to work on a library catalog, and she needed very large cards in order to note all the things that she had determined. So our physical plant department built her a drawer catalog that had room for 8 by 10 cards rather than the little ones that usually accompany a collection. Judy passed away due to breast cancer in mid-career at age 43, which left a huge hole in all of our plans and all of our endeavors. I hired one of my former students, whom I had coached through a master's degree in counseling psychology, to come and work for us, and she took over many of the duties that Judy had left undone. Unfortunately, Teresa Andrews, who was the student, also passed away. We lived together. She moved into my home after her East Side landlord needed the apartment basement suite, and went to a party, came home, and next morning she was almost comatose, and was diagnosed in the hospital with a brain tumor. So twice I lost my partner, and we had to go back to something else. But the point is that we carried right on. We had a huge number of students coming from many parts of the world in order to study at UBC. The library part became our passionate task. We believed strongly that we needed something more than just a static collection of books. We needed a place and a process of recording the student textbooks, because that, of course, was our goal. So we embarked on two things. We embarked on policies of what it would take to create a crane recording center. And what we had to conclude is that it would entail a lot of money to be raised. And so I went out into what I call the rubber chicken circuit, meaning you meet with certain organizations and certain donors, and you press them for money donations. And I think I raised pretty close to the equivalent of about $1 million. And we bought for that broadcast quality equipment and broadcast soundproof reading rooms, and we needed a venue. And fortunately, talk about being the right person in the right place, the Student Union building, sub, had just been finished, and we were able to take two sets of venues, one for the library and one for the production center. And we also were able to beta test a number of new recording procedures, including one which made the ordinary CD, which is usually just runs for 40 playing minutes, into an expanded model that ran for several hours, like 7 hours, in fact. We had the opportunity to beta test this model in Canada and in the United States, where the Library of Congress, Library Services for the Blind and Physically Handicapped, as it's still known today, which incidentally spent millions of dollars of consultants and engineers and whatever, and they had just concluded that it was not possible to come up with a system for computer programmers, of which 2 were blind people, working in an old windmill in Sweden, came up with the answer, and the answer was called the DAISY system. It answered all the needs that we had, and it made it possible for us to record even books that are thesaurus. Is it thesauruses or thesauri? I don't know. We took the recording system on the road, went to a number of educator conventions, and it was a very successful undertaking. The process is now improved to the point, and our production center at Crane is now able also to produce Braille by computer. That is, you type in the text or you input the text in any form, and it turns it into the very important Braille codes, and it turns out the Braille copy, and then you have it bound. And so we can accommodate the Braille readers, we can accommodate the anybody. The important part of the production center is that the student buys their textbooks from the bookstore, and they get to, if the book has not been misabused and whatever, the student gets his money back from the by taking the books back to the bookstore. And so essentially the visually impaired or print impaired student gets a free ride. One of the things that I did to commemorate Judy's superhuman efforts is to start a scholarship which now pays the winner over $3,500 per year, taking care of tuition, taking care of books, taking care of whatever the student needs to spend it on. We certainly at one stage, we switched to supporting students who were not visually impaired, but who were simply unable to read proper printed books. And that included dyslexics, that included people who had psychological problems with reading books. We basically, anybody was welcome to submit their textbooks, get them read, get the tapes, get the CDs. For our students who were studying remotely, or anybody else, are able to get their materials sent by email and could download that onto their computer and use them to their advantage. Those were some of the accomplishments. Now, I would like to thank, of course, the university. I would like to thank the chancellor and the university president. Crane is flourishing. It is still going. I hope it'll go forever. And I would like to say a couple of words about my nominating committee. Who is Tom Teranishi? Tom is my best friend and my best man, and he saw me through 3 weddings and unfortunately 2 funerals. And he and his colleague Laurie Hill, who is a researcher, also a social work graduate, a researcher for the Neil Squire Foundation, who did all the grunt work of taking 40 testimonials and melting them all into one document. It's a big job. So that's Tom Teranishi, and I'm very grateful to him and for being my nominator. I'd like to thank former students, professional colleagues from around the world for their support letters. And I'd like to also again thank the university for taking me on and allowing me to spend a lot of money, but then I raised it. So it was probably the greatest career. Now, the president, in his letter just before Christmas, wanted me to say something about my career highlights. And I would like to say that every day I came to work, working with all these marvelous and courageous people, was a career highlight. That's true enough. So that's my address. Thank you. Pick a career that makes a difference. Also, don't forget your university. Register with the Alumni Association. They have some excellent deals on insurance and God knows what. And also get a lot of satisfaction out of what you're doing. You may not be, for me, I considered what I was doing a job. It was not until I retired that I finally started reflecting on what I had accomplished, and it gave me a tremendous sense of peace of mind and pleasure. Most of all, my pleasure was in meeting these wonderfully courageous young people who came from their homelands to study at UBC.